Hey everybody, welcome to the Clayton Britt Show. Thanks for tuning in today. Today's episode is going to be a breakdown of Game 2 NBA Finals. Warriors versus Celtics. Final score 107-88 with the Warriors tying up the series at one apiece. So today I'm going to kind of talk about the game, some thoughts I had, some player thoughts, some overall big picture stuff, and then hopefully preview Game 3 and see if the Celtics can win one. As you guys know, I am a Celtics fan, and so it is hard to do an objective analysis of the game when you're as vested as I am. But here we go. So early in the game, I thought Derek White did a great job of initiating the offense, and I think that was part of the reason why he was kept in versus Marcus Smart, because he was just doing such a great job of kicking to the open man and also making shots. And so when he's making shots and guys like that are making shots, it makes the Celtics way less of an isolation offense, which I think is really, really helpful and something that they'll need to continue if they want to compete with Golden State in the long term. I was also really impressed by Peyton Pritchard because I think he does such a good job of contesting with Steph and with open shooters, where so many of these guys will go for the contest and they know Steph is looking for the foul when they're running at him, but he does a great job of really focusing on not fouling. And so I think it's really helpful where it's like, if Steph's going to make the shot, Steph's going to make the shot, but you can't foul him in addition to that and bail him out. And so I thought Pritchard did a great job of that throughout the early part of the game too. And in the beginning, the Celtics were not really playing that well, and they're still kind of hanging in there in the first quarter, and they're only down one going into the second. And so I thought that was kind of a similar vibe to what happened in Game 1 before obviously the fourth quarter happened and there was the massive onslaught by the Celtics. But I was also genuinely starting to believe the Celtics are a better team. I'm not sure if I still feel that way, but when they're not playing well and they can still hang with pretty much the best team in basketball, I was very impressed by that. And I also noted that there was 9 turnovers to 4 at one point, and Steph just hit a 3 to tie the game. So I was hoping that Boston was going to kind of get it going and pick up the pace. That did not happen. But then there was a 10-0 run by the Warriors with 5 minutes left in the second to only go up 5. And again, I was feeling the Celtics are still hanging in there. 5 points is 2-possession ball game, that you can come over that very fast. And then, wouldn't you know, a minute 30 later, the Celtics are up 1 with the ball. So they were doing a great job of keeping it close. And after watching this game, I really believe Draymond is the most important player on the Warriors when Steph isn't red hot. I understand Steph can go win you a ball game and Draymond can't, but Draymond is really so important defensively because he allows them to switch, which is important because of the Celtics' length. Not only is he a multi-time defensive player of the year and a great communicator, but I think that really helps. But he's so good in transition offense, which is surprising given that he doesn't have the best handle. And even him being kind of a non-threat offensively, he is so good at the dribble handoff with Steph that while he's not a shooter, he does as much for that offense as pretty much anybody does. And so I was very impressed by Draymond. But I guess this is the time to go into some of Draymond's antics, where I had actually started watching the game about a minute or two late because I thought it was a 9 p.m. Start Eastern, but it was actually 8 p.m., which is great. That's another issue we'll come back to in a little. But as for Draymond, I missed his first technical foul, or I just didn't see it. But then he was getting into people, and I've watched Draymond play a lot before, but he was getting into people maybe the most I'd ever seen him, where he was having so much incidental contact and getting up in the grill of Celtics players, from Grant Williams to Jaylen Brown to Jason Tatum, where I was already wondering when there was going to be a ticky-tack foul called on him just to try and get him to settle down to kind of keep the game in normal basketball and not football. And then the stuff with Jaylen Brown happens where his feet end up on Jaylen Brown. It's not a coincidence. If you look how he falls, he clearly moves his legs over onto Jaylen Brown. And then it wasn't just on his shoulders, it was on his head. You can't put your feet on a guy's head in an NBA game. That's not cool. And then Jaylen Brown pushes his leg off, totally reasonable. And then Draymond moves his legs back closer to Jaylen Brown. And Jaylen is like, what the heck? This is ridiculous. And then Jaylen stands up. I agree he stood over him. And that wasn't cool. But I think it was less of Jaylen trying to be disrespectful and more of him trying to stand his ground. But then Draymond took that as him escalating and got up and then pulled Jaylen Brown's pants down. You also can't do that. So traditionally, I would say you tech them both up, and then that de-escalates the situation. But since Draymond already had the first one, the refs, I think, made a good decision to not tech them both up because this is the NBA Finals. You want to let them play. And so I thought that was good. But Draymond is getting rewarded for his antics where it can't continue like this in my mind. He's straddling the line and he knows it, and the earlier he gets that first flagrant, it's almost better for him because he knows the refs aren't going to give him, it's a one free throw penalty, but then he knows the refs aren't going to kick him out because it's Draymond and it's NBA Finals. You're not going to take out one of the 2 or 3 best players on the Warriors. And so it's a little bit unfair because I think that had he not had his first technical, they would have called the technical on both of them there, but then they ended up not doing it, and so Draymond gets rewarded from his bad behavior earlier in the game by keeping him in the game later. Overall, I do think that it was fine that they didn't because I'm a believer of situational reffing and understanding the moment. I always get frustrated in the NFL when there's not a ton of calls, and then last 3 minutes they're going on a drive, holding, pass interference, all these things, where it's let them play, especially in those key moments. You have to be slick about it too, which is part of the game and the gamesmanship and all of that. But so I'm a fan of the refs understanding the situation and not taking over and taking charge of the game. But I did have to talk about this because this was one of the kind of major storylines out of this game. But yeah, so that Draymond stuff was just kind of ridiculous. But then he goes after the game and says that he gets preferential treatment, which you cannot do. If the refs give you a break and are nice to you, you cannot call them out on a national stage and say that they're giving you preferential treatment. That's ridiculous. One, it's probably not that smart because even if there was a little backdoor kind of agreement of, well, this is kind of how we officiate Draymond, which I'm not saying the refs are agreeing on these things, but as a concept, you can't expose that to the public. So if there was a prop bet on, I'm sure there is somewhere on some sports book, of Draymond getting ejected in one of the remaining games of the series, I would bet the house on it. Because the Celtics are going to go at him even more now that they're aware, and that the entire media and public and referees are made aware of Draymond's feelings. And so I think an ejection's coming, and I go both ways on this topic with Draymond, which is I love that he plays hard and that he's emotional and all those things because he's the spark plug that gets that team going. And so I get it, and I don't fault him for that. And I've heard him say that he plays with passion and he can't tone it down. But I think sometimes it's a little too much. And I'm all for the passion to get the guys going, rally the fans. But I think it's too much for him. And I think that he hurt himself in the finals where he got kicked out for all of his antics with LeBron. And I think it's too much where he's actually hurting his team, not helping. Draymond is most useful for the Warriors, not to fire them up and get a couple hard fouls, whatever. Draymond is there to initiate the offense, play great defense, and so he needs to be cognizant of the fact that he's most useful to the Warriors when he's out there, and that one of these days, especially now that he's called out the refs for it, he is not going to get the benefit of the doubt, and he's going to get kicked out of another NBA Finals game. I mean, how many players, I'm not an NBA historian by any means, but how many players in the last 5 to 10 finals have gotten kicked out and have been very close to getting kicked out in multiple other finals games? So that's kind of my thought on the Draymond stuff. But then the third quarter happens. And the third quarter, everybody knows the Warriors are a great third quarter team. And everybody knows the Celtics are a bad third quarter team. So first of all, I don't understand why you're bad in the third quarter. You have a break, you get time to reset, talk about things you want to talk about, make adjustments. So I understand why the Warriors are great. That makes sense. But I don't understand why the Celtics always come out so dead in the third quarter. And it happened again. And it was one of these things where the Celtics have a bad 10 minutes, just like in the Miami series or the Milwaukee series. And it's like they forget how to play basketball. I don't know what it is, why they can't initiate any offense, why they always settle for terrible, terrible shots. But I don't get it. And you can't do that against great teams. You can't take 7 minutes off, 10 minutes off. You're going to lose. So I don't know how the Celtics remedy that issue, but there needs to be something that happens in the third quarter, because 2 games in a row versus the Warriors, the third quarter is just a joke. And so it's also disheartening as a Celtics fan because, well, I feel like my team has no chance. But for the good chunk of the rest of the game, I thought they played mostly fine. The turnovers were such an issue. They were so sloppy. They came out you cannot turn the ball over that many times. And the Warriors, I think, had a finals record for points off of turnovers. You can't do that, and you especially can't do that with great teams and teams that are so great in transition like the Warriors. Because if you do not have an even amount of guys and the Warriors are coming down, they're going to kick it to the guy on the wing, and he's going to hit the three because that's what the Warriors do. So you have to limit the turnovers. I think it was less Jaylen Brown turnovers and more Tatum turnovers. But the Celtics were just really indecisive the whole game. And if I had started this podcast sooner, you would have heard my thoughts about the Miami series and the Milwaukee series. And my thoughts were that the Celtics do this thing where they drive the basketball and they go to the hoop and then they go up, but they don't actually want to draw the contact and get a layup. They don't try to finish. They get up in the air and then they look to throw it out to the guys on the wings, where I think personally that the Celtics need to drive the basketball to drive the basketball. If the refs are going to call the game the way they're going to call the game, the Celtics need to be in attack mode. They have the size, they are younger, and they're physical, and they need to attack the hoop. The worst thing that happens is you miss a layup, the rest of your guys can get back, and it's not as much of a transition offense. But the best case scenario is you make it, or you draw a foul, and you keep on wearing them down. And so the Celtics, I feel like last night, part of the reason why I was impressed with Derek White is he did a great job of, when he drove the basketball to actually score, not to drive to kick. And so it's just weird watching the Celtics offense, because they kick it to the open guy and he goes to the hoop, and then they just kick it to another guy, and then he drives the hoop and they kick it to another guy, where at some point somebody's going to have to take the shot. I agree that a lot of the Celtics players have a really green light, but they have to attack and actually attack and mean it. So yeah, overall, I don't love the Celtics offense, especially watching it next to the Warriors offense. The Warriors offense flows and there's constant movement, and I understand because of their personnel they can do that, and it helps when you have the greatest shooter of all time and Klay Thompson, who's at worst a top 5 shooter of all time, and Jordan Poole, who's pretty solid. But to get into Jordan Poole, now that I brought it up, how I would describe it is I think Jordan Poole is the kid in class where you're doing a group project and 2 members do 85 or 90% of the work, and then they do the closing slide and the introduction slide, and they talk a little bit in the presentation, and they take all of the credit. Jordan Poole, for a large part of that game, had done almost nothing. He gets hot for 3 minutes and acts like he's king of the world, where I understand you're a young guy, you're playing in the NBA Finals, you're fired up, but his overall attitude, I think that the way he's celebrating and showboating, he does not deserve the credit that he was getting because he didn't do most of the work. So maybe that's just me being a hater or not loving kind of the Warriors flair that I know Warriors fans love. Overall, the Warriors are kind of cocky and showboaty, but that's the Warriors and that's what they do. And so I get it. Maybe this is me being a hater, but I don't know. Jordan Poole is just not it for me. And then kind of circling back about the start times, I am so frustrated. So I have a joke with my family that I'm going to be the commissioner, partly because I always seem to have a rooting interest in games, and that's a whole nother thing that we'll get into another time. But I don't know how Adam Silver is letting these games start on a weeknight at 9 p.m. Eastern time. If you claim you want to grow the game and you want the next generation of fans to watch, how is a 12-year-old or a 10-year-old or an 8-year-old, like, I understand because I did this dance with my parents when I was younger of like, it's a really big game, let me stay up. The games are so late. And also, I'm an adult and I get tired of the late starts. And it's like, I'm going to game 3 actually with my sister. The game starts 9 p.m. on a Wednesday. And they're not going to actually tip off at 9 p.m. They're going to tip off at 9:15. And the halftime seems to be a little longer. And so I think it's just ridiculous that it starts so late. I understand that you want to get all the West Coast viewers, but it's really not fair to the East Coast. And you're not going to get any of the casual basketball fans because they're going to go to bed. And if it wasn't the finals, I know Celtics fans that would not watch the games because they're on so late. They'd watch the first half, and if it was a blowout, they'd turn it off. And so I think they're really doing a disservice that it's so late. I just move it earlier, let more people watch. I mean, if you're so worried about the West Coast audience, they're going to be tuning in for the second half of the game at least, but at least you still get the East Coast fans for the whole game, where you're not going to get the East Coast fans, or a lot of them, that don't have a rooting interest for the second half because nobody wants to go to bed at 11:30 on a weeknight. So I think that's sloppy by the NBA and doesn't encourage people to watch, because if you're a casual fan and you have work in the morning, you don't want to stay up that late. And as someone that's very cognizant of their sleep schedules, I think it's just not that great. And then kind of closing up here, obviously with the constant media stream that we live with, they're going to blow everything out of proportion. But it's so interesting because if the Warriors had won game 1, then it's the Celtics have no chance. They don't have the experience. Game 2's must win. And then the Celtics won, but then the Celtics lose game 2, it's the Warriors made the right adjustments. The Celtics have no chance, all these things. And so it's, I think it's just funny how everybody blows it out of proportion of, no, these are the two best teams. They've had some bad stretches, both of them. But for the most part, these games are pretty close. And so these big sweeping statements, I think, are just crazy. And had the Celtics lost game 1 and then won game 2, it would have been the Celtics made the adjustments. The Celtics are going to go up big when the series goes home. They stole a game on the road. And so it's interesting to see how it would have been portrayed had they won game 1 versus winning game 2 and what the narratives would have been. But then again, those are narratives and they don't actually play the game, so they don't really matter that much. Preview to game 3 now. I'm very excited. It should be awesome. The Garden's going to be rowdy and loud, and I'm sure Draymond is going to get lots of love. But I think the Celtics need to do a better job of limiting the turnovers and also not complaining when they don't get the foul call. Complain after the whistle. oh no, you didn't get the call. Don't throw your hands up and not run back to try and close out on the trail guy on the fast break. It's the NBA Finals. Complain. You have plenty of time to talk to the refs in between whistles. Do not let them get an easy bucket because you throw your arms up in the air. And guess what? If you continue to play hard and through the no calls, they're eventually going to start calling it on you or calling, and you're going to get those fouls. So keep attacking and stop complaining. For the Warriors, I'll be interested to see defensively what kind of lineup they go with. If Kevon Looney had a great game. So I'll be interested to see his minutes, as well as for the Celtics, Grant Williams and Peyton Pritchard too. I think White has earned kind of his spot with more minutes, but I think Pritchard is another player that gives the Celtics a little bit of spark offensively, not just because he can hit threes, because when he attacks, he actually attacks to score. So I think it'll be interesting to see the adjustments. Hopefully the Celtics will not sag off the Warriors again on the three-point line like they did in Game 1. But yeah, I'm excited. I think this is a great series. I think it'll go 6 or 7. I think it's really crucial for the Celtics they have to win one of two at home, because you're not going to go down 3-1 to that team and come back because you don't have LeBron James or Kyrie Irving. But maybe if Draymond gets ejected again, you never know. Full circle. So my prediction is, I think if the Celtics will be very locked down defensively. I understand the Celtics have not played that well at home throughout the playoffs, and everybody talks about that and makes jokes about how the Celtics are a better road team. I think this is going to be different, but it's one of these things where players score, and as a fan, it hurts you differently when different guys score. Like when Clay and Steph score, it's like, oh God, it's happening. They're just daggers. And so if Steph comes out red hot, that could really silence the crowd. But I think Celtics will win Game 3. I really do. I think that if you would have told me before before the start of the finals that it was going to be a 1-1 series coming home, I would have taken that all day long. And I think Celtics will win Game 3. So I will check back with you guys after it's all done, or after Game 3 finishes. We'll do another breakdown, probably the day after. And yeah, well, thanks for listening this long, and talk to you guys on Thursday, because Wednesday is the game.